Harlem, in the heart of the Roaring Twenties, was a kingdom unto itself, a vibrant, pulsating world of jazz, art, and ambition, where a cultural renaissance was exploding on every street corner. And in this kingdom, while men like Duke Ellington were its musical royalty, the undisputed ruler of its underground economy was a woman named Stephanie St. Clair. Known on the streets as Queenie, she was a figure of immense power and unwavering dignity. An immigrant from Martinique, she had arrived in New York with nothing and had, through sheer force of will and a brilliant mind for numbers, built a formidable empire running Harlem's policy rackets, the illegal lottery. She was elegant, impeccably dressed, and possessed a fiery, uncompromising spirit. To the people of Harlem, she was not just a gangster, she was a protector, a provider of jobs, and a fierce champion against the encroaching brutality of the white downtown mobs. Her office, on the top floor of a handsome brownstone, was her throne room. She sat behind a large, polished mahogany desk, the Queen surveying her domain, when her top lieutenant, a loyal and massive man named Bumpy, brought her the morning paper. "There's a new hound nipping at our heels, Queenie," he said, his voice a low rumble. He pointed to a small article on the third page. The headline read, "New Assistant DA Vows to Clean Up Harlem's Numbers Game." The article featured a photograph of a young, handsome man with a square jaw, intense eyes, and an air of righteous, idealistic ambition. His name was James Powell, a newly appointed assistant district attorney, a rising star in the legal world, determined to make a name for himself by taking down the city's most notorious racketeers. And his first target, he had publicly declared, was the Queen of Harlem herself. "He sees the world in black and white, this one," Queenie murmured, studying the man's photograph. She had seen his type before, young, privileged idealists who believed the law was a sacred text, blind to the shades of grey that coloured the real world. They were often the most dangerous, because they were driven by a conviction that they were unequivocally right. Miles downtown, in a sterile wood-panelled office, Assistant DA James Powell was laying out his strategy to his own team. To him, Stephanie St. Clair was not a community champion. She was a criminal, plain and simple. She ran an illegal gambling operation that, in his eyes, preyed upon the poor. The stories of her generosity and her battles against the violent mobsters like Dutch Schultz were to him nothing more than romanticized propaganda. "She is a cancer in this community," James said, his voice ringing with the passion of a true believer. "She cloaks her criminality in a veil of charity, but she is no different from any other gangster. We will cut off the head of the snake. We will start with Queenie St. Clair, and we will not stop until Harlem is clean." He was brilliant, meticulous, and utterly determined. He spent his days and nights building his case, interviewing informants, and mapping out her operations. He saw her as a puzzle to be solved, an equation to be balanced on the scales of justice. He did not see the woman. Back in Harlem, Queenie stood at her window looking out at the vibrant, teeming streets of her kingdom. She had faced down violent mobsters, corrupt cops, and the systemic prejudice of a city that sought to contain her. This young, idealistic lawyer was just another challenger, another man who had underestimated the woman he was trying to destroy. "Tell the boys to be careful," she said to Bumpy, her voice calm and steady. "And get me everything you can on Mr. James Powell. I want to know who his friends are, what he drinks, and most importantly, what he fears." A slow, dangerous smile touched her lips. Mr. Powell wanted a war. He had no idea he was about to step into the ring with a true heavyweight champion. The game was set. The idealistic lawyer had made his first move, and the Queen of Harlem was more than ready to make hers. James Powell believed in evidence, in facts, in the clear, unambiguous letter of the law. To truly defeat his target, he knew he had to understand her operations from the inside. His strategy was to go undercover, not as a gangster, but as a simple, curious citizen. He would observe her in her natural habitat, find the cracks in her armor, and gather the intelligence he needed to dismantle her empire. His opportunity came in the form of a community fundraiser, a block party organized and funded entirely by Stephanie St. Clair to raise money for a local orphanage. It was, James thought with cynical certainty, a public relations stunt, a transparent attempt to buy the loyalty of the people she was simultaneously exploiting. He attended, dressed in a simple suit without his usual expensive tie, hoping to blend in with the crowd. The scene that greeted him was not what he expected. The street was alive with a vibrant, infectious joy. A live jazz band played on a makeshift stage, their music a lifeblood that pulsed through the laughing, dancing crowd. Tables overflowed with food, free for anyone who was hungry. Children ran about with painted faces, and neighbors greeted each other with warm, familiar hugs. This was not the grim, crime-ridden slum he had imagined. This was a community, and at its center was the Queen. Queenie St. Clair moved through the party with the regal grace of her nickname. She wore an elegant but simple dress of deep purple silk and a wide-brimmed hat, her posture perfect, her expression warm and engaging. She was not surrounded by armed thugs, but by the adoring people of her neighborhood. She kissed babies, shared a laugh with a group of elderly women, and slipped a few dollars into the hand of a struggling musician. She was not a distant crime lord, she was a beloved matriarch. James watched his carefully constructed black and white worldview beginning to feel uncomfortably gray. He saw the genuine affection in the eyes of the people who spoke to her. He saw the way she listened, truly listened to their problems. This was not the simple, greedy criminal he had built up in his mind. The reality of her was far more complex and far more dangerous to his crusade. As he stood observing from the edge of the crowd, a voice smooth as velvet but with an undercurrent of steel spoke from right beside him. "It is a fine party, is it not, Mr. Powell?" He started, turning to find Queenie St. Clair standing next to him, a small knowing smile on her face. She held 2 glasses of lemonade. She offered one to him. He was so stunned by her directness that he took it automatically. "How did you know who I was?" he stammered, feeling like a schoolboy caught spying. "I am in the business of information," she said simply, her dark eyes sparkling with an amusement he found deeply unsettling. "It is my business to know when a fox has entered the henhouse. Even one who tries so very hard to look like a lamb." She took a delicate sip of her lemonade. "So tell me, Assistant District Attorney, have you found the evidence of corruption and decay you were looking for?" "I see a very effective public performance," he countered, regaining his composure. "One designed to mask an illegal enterprise." Queenie laughed, a rich, genuine sound. "You see what you want to see. You look at my lottery and you see a crime. The people here," she said, gesturing to the joyful crowd, "see a chance, a dream. And the money from that crime is what pays for the food on these tables, for the new roof on that church, for the winter coats on those children." She turned to face him fully, her expression now serious. "You come here from your downtown office with your fine education and your rigid laws, and you believe you are going to save these people, but you have no idea what they need saving from. It is not from me, Mr. Powell. It is from the poverty and the indifference of your world." Her words were a direct hit, striking at the very heart of his idealistic crusade. He had come here to gather evidence, but he was being put on trial himself. "The law is the law," he said, his voice firm but lacking its earlier conviction. "Is it?" she challenged, her voice a soft, dangerous whisper. "Is the law that allows men like Dutch Schultz to operate with violence and impunity the same law that you wish to use to destroy a woman who provides for her community? The law is not always the same as justice, Mr. Powell. A man of your intelligence should know the difference." She finished her lemonade and placed the empty glass on a nearby table. "Enjoy the party," she said, her charming smile returning. "You have declared war on my kingdom. It seems only fair that you should enjoy its hospitality before you attempt to burn it to the ground." She gave him a final, unreadable look, then turned and walked away, disappearing back into the crowd of her adoring subjects. James Powell stood frozen in place, the glass of lemonade suddenly heavy in his hand. He had come here seeking a clear enemy, a simple villain. He had found instead a complex, powerful, and strangely compelling queen. She had not only acknowledged his threat, she had dismantled it with a few well-aimed words. His war on crime had just become a war of ideals, and it had become intensely, dangerously personal. The encounter at the block party left James Powell deeply unsettled. He returned to his quiet, orderly office downtown, the sound of the jazz band and the easy laughter of the crowd still ringing in his ears. He spread his meticulously organized files on Stephanie Saint. Clair across his desk, the words criminal, racketeer, and extortionist staring up at him. But the words now felt hollow, a simplistic black and white description of a woman who was, he was beginning to realize, a masterpiece of complex, vibrant color. His crusade, which had once felt so righteous and clear, was now clouded with doubt. Queenie's words echoed in his mind. The law is not always the same as justice, Mr. Powell. Was he so blinded by the letter of the law that he was failing to see the spirit of justice? He knew he could not build a case against her based on ledgers alone. He needed to understand her power, her influence, the source of the fierce loyalty she commanded. He began to spend his evenings in Harlem, not as a spy but as a quiet observer. He would sit in the back of smoky jazz clubs, nursing a single drink, listening to the conversations around him. He would eat in small family-run diners, his ears open. And he heard her name everywhere. He heard a shopkeeper praise her for giving him a loan to get through a tough winter. He heard two mothers discussing the new playground she had funded. He heard a musician speak of how she had paid for a doctor when his child was sick. She was not just a numbers runner. She was a one-woman government, a bank, and a social safety net for a community that the city had forgotten. Their paths crossed again one chilly afternoon. James was in a small, crowded marketplace when he saw her. She was not holding court, but was engaged in a quiet, serious conversation with an elderly vegetable vendor. The vendor was distressed, and Queenie was listening with a patient, focused intensity. As James watched from a distance, two large, thuggish-looking white men approached the vendor's stall. They were Dutch Schultz's men. He recognized them from police photographs. They began to harass the old man, knocking over a crate of apples, demanding their protection money. James's first instinct was to intervene, to uphold the law. But before he could move, Queenie stepped forward. She did not raise her voice. She did not call for her own men. She simply placed herself between the thugs and the old vendor. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice a calm, icy blade, "I believe you are lost. Your territory ends 10 blocks south of here. I suggest you remember that." One of the thugs sneered. "And who's gonna make us, Queenie?" Queenie smiled, a slow, dangerous smile that did not reach her eyes. "I am," she said simply. "And unlike you, I do not need to bring thugs with me to collect my debts. I have the loyalty of every man, woman, and child on this street. You are on my land, and you are trespassing." There was something in her voice, an aura of absolute, unshakable authority that made the two large men hesitate. They looked around and saw that the bustling market had gone silent. Every eye was on them. The butcher was holding his cleaver a little too tightly. Two large dock workers had stopped unloading their truck and were watching, their arms crossed. They were not Queenie's soldiers. They were just her neighbors, and they were ready to defend their queen. The thugs, realizing they were dangerously outmatched, muttered a curse and backed away, disappearing into the crowd. Queenie turned back to the old vendor, her expression softening instantly. She helped him pick up the scattered apples, slipping a few folded bills into his hand before he could protest. She then looked up, and her eyes met James's across the crowded street. He had seen the entire exchange. He had witnessed firsthand the truth of her words. She was not a cancer on this community. She was its fierce, unofficial protector. She was the only law that truly mattered here. He could not deny the wave of grudging, profound admiration that washed over him. This woman, his target, his enemy, possessed more courage and commanded more genuine respect than any politician or police captain he had ever met. She held his gaze for a long moment, a silent, challenging question in her eyes. "Now do you understand?" James gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. It was not a surrender. It was an acknowledgement, a sign of respect from one warrior to another. He turned and walked away from the market, his mind in a state of turmoil. His legal case against her was still his duty, but his heart, his conscience, his very definition of justice, was now hopelessly, dangerously conflicted. He was beginning to admire the woman he had vowed to destroy. The silent nod of acknowledgement that passed between them in the marketplace was a declaration of a truce in a war that had, until now, been fought only in James Powell's mind. He returned to his downtown office a changed man. The neat files, the clear-cut legal theories, the black-and-white certainty of his crusade, it all seemed like the work of a naive stranger. He could no longer see Stephanie St. Clair as a simple problem to be solved by the blunt instrument of the law. She was a paradox, a lawbreaker who upheld a stricter, more effective form of justice than the city itself. He realized his current strategy was doomed to fail. To prosecute Queenie St. Clair would be to declare war not on a gangster, but on the entire community of Harlem, a community that she, not the city, truly protected. The thought of putting the woman who had faced down Dutch Schultz's thugs to save an old man in a cage felt for the first time like a profound injustice. He needed a new strategy. It was a radical, career-threatening idea, but it was the only one that felt right. He would not try to destroy her. He would try to understand her. And perhaps, just perhaps, he could work with her. He sent her a formal hand-delivered letter requesting a private meeting. He did not mention his ongoing investigation. He framed it as a discussion of matters of mutual interest concerning the welfare of the Harlem community. He expected her to refuse, to see it as a trap, but to his surprise, a reply came the next day. A simple, typed note agreeing to meet at a quiet, neutral restaurant in Midtown. The restaurant was an old, respectable Italian place, the kind of establishment that prided itself on its discretion. James arrived first, his heart pounding with a nervous energy he hadn't felt since his first day in court. She arrived precisely on time, a vision of calm, regal elegance in a simple but exquisitely tailored suit. She sat opposite him, her dark eyes watchful, revealing nothing. "Mr. Powell," she began, her voice a smooth, cool melody. "You have declared your intention to destroy me in the public papers. Forgive me if I am curious as to the nature of this meeting." "I have come to realize, Mrs. St. Clair," James said, deciding that honesty was his only viable weapon, "that my understanding of your enterprise was incomplete. I have seen the good you do for your community. I have also seen the evil you protect them from." "And this has changed your mind about putting me in prison?" she asked, one eyebrow arching with a cool, amused skepticism. "It has complicated my definition of justice," he admitted. "I am still an officer of the law. I cannot ignore that your business is illegal. But I can no longer ignore that men like Dutch Schultz, who deal in violence and narcotics, are a far greater threat to the people of Harlem than your numbers game." He leaned forward, his expression earnest. "I want to propose an alliance, an unofficial one, of course. I want to go after Schultz, but my downtown informants are useless in his territory. You, however, your network is the lifeblood of this community. You know his operations. You know his weaknesses." Queenie stared at him, her face a perfect, unreadable mask. She was stunned. This idealistic young lawyer, her sworn enemy, was proposing a secret partnership. It was either the most clever trap she had ever encountered or the most naive, audacious move she had ever seen. "And what do I get in return for helping the district attorney's office do its job?" she asked, her voice laced with irony. "You get Dutch Schultz out of your neighborhood," James replied simply. "You get his drugs off your streets and his thugs away from your shopkeepers. I will use the full force of the law, a force you cannot command, to remove a cancer that we both agree is malignant. I am offering to be your weapon, Mrs. St. Clair. No strings attached." She studied him for a long, silent moment, her sharp, intelligent eyes seeming to peer directly into his soul, weighing his sincerity, his motives. She saw the conflict in him, the battle between his rigid adherence to the law and his emerging, more complex sense of justice. She saw that he was not trying to trap her. He was trying, in his own flawed, idealistic way, to do the right thing. It was a quality she had not expected to find in a man from his world. A slow, dangerous smile touched her lips. "You are a very interesting man, Mr. Powell," she said. "Far more interesting than I first assumed." She extended a hand across the table. "You have yourself an alliance. I will provide you with the information you need on one condition." "What is it?" he asked, taking her hand, a jolt of electricity passing between them at the contact. "That you have dinner with me again next week," she said, her eyes sparkling with a new, playful light. to discuss the progress of our joint venture. James was momentarily speechless. He had come here to propose a dangerous secret war. He had left with a date. As they shook hands, sealing their unprecedented treacherous bargain, the line between prosecutor and criminal, between enemy and ally, blurred into an exciting and utterly dangerous new territory. Their alliance was ruthlessly effective. Armed with the precise, invaluable information that only Queenie could provide, James Powell launched a series of targeted, devastating raids on Dutch Schultz's operations. One by one, Schultz's most profitable speakeasies were shut down, his hidden breweries were seized, and his key enforcers were arrested on ironclad charges. For the first time in years, the iron grip of the downtown mob on Harlem was beginning to weaken. James became a hero in the DA's office, hailed for his brilliant strategy. Only he and Queenie knew the truth. His success was entirely dependent on the wisdom of his sworn enemy. Their weekly progress dinners became a fixture in their lives. They would meet at a discreet upscale restaurant in Midtown, a neutral territory between their two worlds. They would begin by discussing the case, two generals planning a campaign, their minds perfectly in sync. He admired her sharp, strategic thinking, and she was impressed by his meticulous attention to legal detail. But as the weeks went on, their conversations began to drift. They moved from the subject of Dutch Schultz to the subject of themselves. He learned of her childhood in Martinique, of her arrival in America with nothing but her wits, of the fierce, protective love she held for the community that had become her family. He saw not a criminal but a brilliant survivor, a queen who had built her own kingdom because the world had refused to give her one. She, in turn, saw the man behind the idealistic prosecutor. She learned of the immense pressure he was under, of his lonely life in a city where he felt like an outsider. A man of simple, rigid principles in a world of complex, grey morality. She found his unwavering belief in justice, even when she disagreed with his methods, to be strangely compelling, even noble. The professional admiration between them slowly, inevitably, began to smolder into a dangerous personal attraction. They would find their eyes lingering on each other across the table a moment too long. A hand brushing against another as they reached for the wine list would send a jolt of electricity between them. They were enemies who had become allies, and now they were treading on the treacherous ground of becoming something more. Dutch Schultz, however, was not a man to be dismantled without fighting back. Enraged and hemorrhaging money, he realized that the successful raids against him were not just bad luck. They were a coordinated attack. He knew Queenie was his enemy, and he knew Powell was the DA leading the charge. It did not take a genius to suspect they were somehow working together, and he decided to send them a message. One rainy evening, after another successful dinner meeting, James was escorting Queenie back to her car, which was parked in a quiet alley behind the restaurant. The air was thick with the scent of wet pavement and the distant sound of a jazz trumpet. As they walked down the dimly lit alley, two large, dark figures stepped out from the shadows, blocking their path. Schultz's men. "Mr. Powell," one of them said with a sneer, revealing the glint of a lead pipe in his hand. "The boss sends his regards. He wants you to know that it's not healthy to do business in Harlem without his permission." James's blood ran cold. He instinctively moved, placing himself between Queenie and the two thugs. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, his voice steady despite the frantic pounding of his heart. "Don't you?" the other thug said, taking a menacing step forward. "We think you do, and we're here to deliver a message to your business partner." In that moment, James Powell was not a prosecutor. He was a man protecting the woman he loved. He knew they couldn't win a physical fight. He had to use his mind. "So you're making a mistake," he said, his voice loud and authoritative. "A federal officer is meeting me here in 2 minutes. If he sees you, you will be facing a federal charge, not just a local one. I suggest you leave now." It was a complete bluff, a desperate gamble. The thugs hesitated for a fraction of a second, their small minds trying to calculate the risk. It was the only opening James needed. He grabbed Queenie's hand. "Run!" he yelled. They ran, their footsteps echoing on the wet cobblestones as the thugs, taken by surprise, began to chase them. James pulled her into another darker alley, a labyrinth of overflowing trash cans and fire escapes. They pressed themselves into a shadowed doorway as their pursuers ran past the entrance. They stood together in the darkness, their bodies pressed close, their breathing ragged. James could feel the warmth of her, the scent of her perfume. He could feel the frantic beating of her heart, or perhaps it was his own. The danger, the adrenaline, the sheer terrifying intimacy of the moment shattered the last of their carefully constructed barriers. "Are you all right?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. "Yes," she breathed, looking up at him, her dark eyes wide in the shadows. "You were very brave." "I was terrified," he admitted, his voice a raw, honest whisper. "I know," she said softly. He looked down at her, at this incredible, powerful and beautiful woman who had turned his entire world upside rushed. His duty, his career, his carefully ordered life, none of it mattered in that moment. All that mattered was her safety. All that mattered was her. "Stephanie," he murmured, using her given name for the first time. And then he kissed her. It was a desperate, hungry kiss, a kiss born of fear and relief, and a love that had been simmering for weeks under the guise of a strategic alliance. It was a kiss that broke all the rules, that defied all logic. It was the kiss of an enemy, an ally, a partner. When they finally broke apart, the line had been crossed, irrevocably. They were no longer just allies. The prosecutor who had vowed to destroy her had just risked his life for her. And in the heart of a dark Chicago alley, their dangerous alliance had just been sealed as a dangerous and undeniable love affair. Their love affair was a secret kept in the heart of a city of secrets. Their meetings became more infrequent, more dangerous. They would steal moments together in quiet, out-of-the-way places, a late-night coffee in a small diner, a shared bench in a foggy park, a brief charged conversation in the stacks of a public library. Every shared glance, every fleeting touch was fraught with the immense peril of their situation. The danger seemed only to heighten the intensity of their feelings, a desperate, brilliant flame burning in the darkness. James Powell was a man torn in two. By day, he was the assistant district attorney, legally and ethically bound to continue building his case against Stephanie St. Clair. He would sit in his office staring at the evidence, at the cold, hard facts of her illegal enterprise, and his conscience would be a torment. By night, he was James, a man in love who would meet with Stephanie and see the fierce, honorable woman who used the profits from that same enterprise to protect a community the law had abandoned. He was living a lie, and the weight of it was becoming unbearable. Their joint war against Dutch Schultz continued with ruthless efficiency. With Queenie's intelligence, James's office landed blow after blow, dismantling Schultz's empire piece by piece. But Schultz was a cornered rat, and cornered rats are at their most vicious. Realizing he could not defeat Queenie through street violence, he decided to attack her from a different direction. He would use the law she so cleverly navigated. He found his weapon in a corrupt informant within the police department. A story was carefully leaked to the district attorney himself. A story of an ambitious young prosecutor who was having an illicit affair with his primary target. A story that suggested the DA's office's recent successes were not due to brilliant police work, but to a treacherous collaboration. The summons came on a cold Tuesday morning. James was called into the office of the district attorney, a formidable old-school man of the law named Thomas Abernathy. Abernathy was James's mentor, the man who had seen his potential and believed in his righteous crusade. "James," Abernathy began, his face grim, his voice heavy with a disappointment that was worse than any anger. "I have received a disturbing report, an accusation of the most serious nature. It has been alleged that your relationship with the target of your investigation, Stephanie St. Clair, has become unprofessional." James's blood ran cold. The moment he had been dreading had arrived. "It is being said," Abernathy continued, his eyes boring into James, "that you are compromised, that you are in a personal relationship with this woman, and that this alliance is the true source of your information on the Schultz case." He leaned forward. "Look me in the eye, son, and tell me this is a lie." This was the crossroads. James could lie. He could deny everything. sacrificing his honor to save his career. Or he could tell the truth, and in doing so destroy himself and likely condemn Stephanie to prison, confirming every accusation against them. But as he stood there, he saw Stephanie's face in his mind. He saw her courage, her dignity, her fierce love for her people. He thought of her words, "The law is not always the same as justice." And in that moment, he finally truly understood. His duty was not to the rigid letter of the law, but to the more complex, more difficult spirit of justice. "I cannot lie to you, sir," James said, his voice quiet but steady. "My relationship with Mrs. St. Clair has evolved, but not in the way you have been told." He took a deep breath. "My investigation has taught me that Harlem is not a simple problem of crime. It is a community under siege, not just from gangsters like Schultz, but from the poverty and the prejudice of our own city. Mrs. St. Clair, while operating outside the law, provides a form of order and protection that the law has failed to deliver. To prosecute her would be to remove the only shield those people have against a far greater evil." He looked his mentor in the eye. "I can no longer in good conscience lead this prosecution. My personal feelings have made it impossible for me to be objective. But more than that, I have come to believe that prosecuting this woman would be a profound injustice." He placed his badge on the district attorney's polished mahogany desk. "Therefore, I must tender my resignation, effective immediately." Abernathy stared at him, stunned into silence. He saw not a corrupt lawyer, but a man of principle making an impossible choice. James Powell walked out of the district attorney's office a free man. He had lost his career, his reputation, his future. He had committed an act of professional treason, but for the first time in months, his conscience was clear. He knew exactly who he was and what he stood for. He went straight to Harlem. He went to her. He found her in the bookstore, the quiet sanctuary that had become the heart of their strange courtship. She looked up as he entered, a questioning smile on her face that faded when she saw his expression. "James, what is it?" "I resigned," he said simply. She stared at him, her eyes wide with shock and a dawning understanding. "Because of me?" "No," he said, walking towards her, his love for her a clear, bright flame in his eyes. "For me. For my own soul." He took her hands in his. "I have spent my entire life serving the law, but today I chose justice. I chose you. I have no career, no prospects. I have nothing left to offer you but my heart." Tears streamed down Queenie's face. She looked at this incredible, honorable man who had just sacrificed everything for her. He had given up his entire world for a chance to be in hers. "You have everything, James," she whispered, her voice thick with an emotion so powerful it was a physical force. "You have everything that has ever mattered." She pulled him close, and in the quiet, book-lined sanctuary, the Queen of Harlem and the disgraced lawyer held each other, two fugitives from their old lives, ready to face an uncertain future together. James Powell's resignation sent shockwaves through the city's legal and criminal circles. For the downtown elite, it was a scandalous fall from grace, the story of a promising career destroyed by a foolish infatuation with a notorious underworld figure. But in Harlem, the story was told differently. It was a tale of honor, of a man from downtown who had chosen justice over the law, a man who had sacrificed everything for their queen. Overnight, James went from being a feared prosecutor to a respected, if mysterious, local legend. Their love, once a dangerous secret, was now a quiet, public fact. They were an undeniable power couple, seen walking together through the vibrant streets, their partnership a source of endless fascination and pride for the community. James, free from the constraints of his old life, found a new purpose. He became Queenie's most trusted advisor, his brilliant legal mind now dedicated not to destroying her empire, but to making it safer, stronger, and more just. He helped her establish legitimate businesses, real estate, community investment funds, creating a path for her to slowly, methodically move her operations out of the shadows and into the light. She, in turn, healed the part of him that his rigid, idealistic world had nearly starved to death. She showed him the joy of jazz, the richness of her culture, and the profound strength of a community bound together by loyalty and love. They were happy, existing in a bubble of shared purpose and deep, passionate love. But Dutch Schultz was not a man who forgave or forgot. With James no longer a threat from within the DA's office, Schultz saw an opportunity to finally eliminate his greatest rival. He decided to handle the matter himself, to make a public, brutal example of the Queen and her disgraced lawyer. The confrontation came on a busy Saturday afternoon, right in the heart of Harlem. James and Queenie were leaving a small cafe when two large black cars screeched to a halt, blocking their path. Dutch Schultz and a half-dozen of his most brutal thugs emerged, their faces grim, their intentions clear. The street went silent. Shopkeepers ducked into their doorways. The lively sounds of Harlem life died, replaced by a tense, fearful hush. "Well, well," Schultz sneered, his eyes locking onto Queenie. "The Queen and her lapdog. I heard you were no longer a man of the law, Powell." "That makes this so much simpler. What do you want, Schultz?" Queenie asked, her voice calm and steady, though she instinctively moved closer to James. "What I've always wanted," he said with a vicious smile. "This territory, and a little respect. I'm taking over, starting today, and you two," he gestured with his chin, "are going to watch as I do." His men began to advance, their hands reaching inside their coats. James stepped forward, placing himself in front of Queenie. He was not a fighter and he had no weapon, but he would not let them touch her. But before Schultz's men could take another step, something remarkable happened. From the doorways of the surrounding shops, people began to emerge. The butcher, still holding his cleaver. The baker, his arms white with flour. Two large dock workers from the corner. A group of musicians from the nearby jazz club. They did not hold guns. They simply stood, silent and unmoving, forming a human wall behind their queen. Schultz faltered, looking at the sea of determined, angry faces. He had come to fight a gangster. He had not anticipated having to fight an entire community. "These people won't stop a bullet, Queenie," he snarled, trying to regain control. "You are wrong, Mr. Schultz," James said, his voice ringing with a newfound authority. "These people are not her army. They are her family. And you are not just a gangster. You are a wanted fugitive. I may no longer be a prosecutor, but I spent the last 6 months of my career building a federal case against you for tax evasion. The evidence is now in the hands of the U.S. Attorney's Office. I believe the warrant for your arrest was issued this morning." Schultz's face went pale. He had been so focused on his war with Queenie, he hadn't realized James had been fighting a different, more deadly battle against him all along. "You're bluffing," he hissed. As if on cue, the sound of police sirens echoed in the distance, growing steadily closer. The federal agents were on their way. Panic flared in the eyes of Schultz's men. They looked at their boss, then at the united front of the Harlem community, and then they heard the approaching sirens. They had lost. Schultz gave Queenie and James one last look of pure, venomous hatred, then scrambled into his car and sped away, his gang scattering in his wake, just moments before the federal cars arrived. The street erupted in a triumphant cheer. The people of Harlem surrounded their queen, their faces full of relief and adoration. She had faced down the monster, and she had won. Queenie looked at James, her own eyes shining with love and immense pride. He had not used his fists. He had used his mind, his knowledge of the law, to protect her and her kingdom in a way she never could have done alone. He took her hand, and in front of the entire cheering community, he raised it to his lips. They were no longer a secret. They were the undisputed king and queen of Harlem. Their power derived not from crime or the law, but from the unshakable loyalty and love of their people. Their future, once so uncertain, was now as bright and as resilient as the spirit of Harlem itself. The news of Dutch Schultz's arrest by federal agents, thanks to the evidence James had provided, swept through Harlem like a liberating wildfire. The tyrant who had plagued their streets was gone. And the unlikely couple who had engineered his downfall, the Queen of Numbers and the disgraced lawyer who loved her, became the stuff of legend. They were no longer a scandal. They were heroes. Their love, now open and public, was a powerful symbol for the community. James, with his sharp legal mind, became an invaluable partner to Queenie. He helped her legitimize her businesses, creating investment funds for Black-owned enterprises and establishing charitable foundations. He was her trusted advisor, her fierce protector, and her devoted consort. She, in turn, was his heart, his home, and his connection to the vibrant, resilient community that had embraced him as one of their own. It was clear to everyone that their partnership was the future of Harlem, and that future needed to be consecrated. Their wedding was not a quiet, private affair. It was a celebration for all of Harlem. They were married on a bright Saturday in June at the Abyssinian Baptist Church, the grandest church in the neighborhood, its pews overflowing with people from every walk of life: shopkeepers, musicians, doctors, laborers, and the extended family of the community Queenie had so long protected. Queenie was a vision. She wore a magnificent gown of shimmering ivory silk, its elegant lines accentuating her regal posture. She looked not like a gangster, but like the queen she truly was. James stood beside her at the altar, handsome and confident in a perfectly tailored suit, his eyes full of a love and adoration that filled the entire church. Their vows were a testament to their incredible journey. They did not speak in platitudes. They spoke their truth. "I came into your life as an enemy," James said, his voice clear and strong, his gaze locked with hers. "I saw only the law, a rigid world of black and white. You taught me the meaning of justice, a world of complex, beautiful color. You are my queen, my partner, my conscience. I pledge you my life, my loyalty, and my heart from this day forward." Queenie's own vows were spoken with a quiet, powerful emotion. "I have been a queen without a king for a very long time," she said, her voice resonating with love. "I built a kingdom to protect myself from a world that would not have me. But you, James Powell, you did not try to conquer my kingdom. You came to understand it. You chose to share it. You are the only man I have ever met who is strong enough to be my partner. I love you." When the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, the church erupted in a joyous, thunderous cheer that spilled out onto the streets. The reception was a massive block party, a magnificent echo of the fundraiser where they had first truly met. Jazz bands played on every corner, tables overflowed with food, and the people of Harlem danced in the streets celebrating the union of their queen and her chosen king. Later that evening, as the party raged on, James and Queenie slipped away to the rooftop of her brownstone, overlooking the vibrant kingdom below. The air was warm, filled with the sounds of music and laughter. "Happy, Mrs. Powell?" he murmured, pulling her close. "I have never been happier, Mr. Saint." "Clair Powell," she replied with a laugh, giving his new adopted hyphenated name a try. He smiled, wrapping his arms around her. "I gave up everything for you," he said softly. "My career, my reputation, my entire world." "And what did you find?" she asked, her hands coming up to cup his face. "I found everything," he answered, his voice full of a profound, unshakable certainty. "I found justice. I found a home. I found a purpose. I found you." He kissed her then, a deep, loving kiss under the Harlem stars. The lawyer and the queen were gone. In their place stood a husband and a wife, a true king and queen, their reign of love and partnership just beginning, their future as bright and as full of life as the incredible, resilient neighborhood that lay at their feet. The years following their wedding were a golden age for Harlem, and Stephanie and James Powell were at its heart. Their brownstone became an unofficial city hall, a place where people came not with fear but with hopes and dreams. They were a formidable team, their skills perfectly complementing each other. Queenie, with her deep roots in the community and her unmatched understanding of its needs, was the visionary. James, with his brilliant legal mind and knowledge of the downtown power structures, was the architect who turned her visions into reality. Together, they began the slow, methodical process of transforming her old empire. One by one, the illegal lottery operations were phased out, replaced by legitimate, community-owned businesses. They used her vast capital to create investment funds that provided loans to black entrepreneurs who were routinely denied by the city's white-owned banks. They bought tenement buildings, renovating them and charging fair rent. They were building not a criminal enterprise, but an economic fortress. The idea for their greatest project was born from a moment of injustice. A talented young man in the neighborhood, a brilliant cook, had his application for a loan to start his own small restaurant rejected by a bank downtown, the loan officer barely glancing at his well-researched business plan. Queenie heard the story and was filled with a familiar cold fury. "They will never see us as equals," she said to James that evening, her voice tight with anger. "They will take our music and our art, but they will never give us the keys to our own kingdom." "Then we must forge our own keys," James replied, his mind already working. And so, the Harlem Community Trust was born. It was a revolutionary idea, a bank for the people funded by Queenie's capital and structured by James's legal expertise. Its sole purpose was to invest in Harlem. It offered fair loans to aspiring business owners, provided mortgages for families, and gave out grants to artists and community projects. It was their masterpiece, the culmination of their shared vision. Queenie was its heart, her intuition guiding its investments. James was its mind, ensuring its stability and its legal integrity. The day the trust opened its doors was a bigger celebration than their wedding. It was a day of profound, tangible hope for the entire community. The first loan they approved was for the young, talented cook, who would go on to open one of the most celebrated restaurants in Harlem. One afternoon, a few years after the trust was established, Queenie and James stood on the balcony of their brownstone, looking out at the thriving streets below. They could see new businesses with fresh paint on their signs, children playing in a clean, safe park they had funded, and the general, vibrant hum of a community that was not just surviving, but flourishing. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked him softly. "Your old life? The courtroom battles? The prestige?" James smiled, wrapping his arm around her. "I was fighting for an abstract idea of the law," he said. "But here with you, I have spent my life fighting for real people, for justice." There is no comparison. He looked out at the street, at the tangible results of their partnership. "I was a prosecutor. My job was to put people in cages. But you, my love," he said, turning to her, his eyes full of a deep, abiding love, "you taught me how to set them free." She leaned her head against his shoulder, a feeling of profound contentment washing over her. She was still a queen, but her kingdom was no longer one of shadows and numbers. It was a kingdom of hope, of opportunity, of a future they had built together. Her greatest gamble had never been on a number, but on the heart of an idealistic lawyer, and her winnings were greater than any fortune she had ever imagined. The years passed, and Harlem, despite the hardships of the Great Depression that gripped the nation, remained a bastion of resilience and vibrant culture. At its heart was the Harlem Community Trust, the institution that Stephanie and James had built together. It became a financial fortress for the community, its wise investments and fair loans, allowing businesses to stay open and families to keep their homes when the rest of the city was in turmoil. Stephanie St. Clair, the once feared queen of numbers, was now the beloved godmother of Harlem. Her name was synonymous with strength, integrity, and a fierce, protective love for her people. James Powell, the man who had given up his career for her, found a greater calling. He became the most respected legal advocate in the community, a tireless champion for civil rights and economic justice, fighting his battles not in courtrooms, but in boardrooms and City Hall. Their partnership was the bedrock upon which a new generation of Harlem was built. They never had children of their own, but in truth they had thousands. Every entrepreneur who got their start with a loan from the trust, every child who played in a park they had funded, every family that found a home through their efforts, they were all a part of their legacy. One warm summer evening in the late 1930s, an older, silver-haired James and a still regal Stephanie walked hand in hand down Lenox Avenue. The street was alive with music and light. They passed a thriving restaurant owned by a chef who had gotten his start with one of their first loans. They walked by a jazz club, famous throughout the city, that they had saved from closing. They were greeted with smiles, with waves, with warm words of respect from everyone they passed. They were not feared rulers, they were beloved leaders. "Do you remember," James said, his voice a low, contented murmur as he squeezed her hand, "the first time I came here, I saw only crime and decay. I was so arrogant. I was so blind." "You were not blind, my love," she replied, her own voice full of a deep, abiding affection. "You were just looking at the wrong things. You were looking for criminals to punish. You hadn't yet learned to look for kings and queens to empower." He smiled. "And then I met the Queen." They stopped in front of the small, charming bookstore that they now owned together, the quiet sanctuary where their secret alliance had first blossomed into something more. It was now a literary hub for Harlem's great writers and thinkers. "You know," he said, looking at her in the warm glow of the streetlights, "my old boss, Abernathy, still sends me a Christmas card every year. He told me in his last one that the man who replaced me, my rival, was eventually disbarred for corruption, the very thing he accused me of." "The law and justice are two very different things," she said, echoing the words she had spoken to him all those years ago. "They are," he agreed. "But I have found that true justice is simply the act of building a world where everyone has a chance to be happy. And I found that with you." He looked at the vibrant, thriving street, at the community they had nurtured together. He had come to Harlem to destroy a kingdom he did not understand. He had ended up helping the woman he loved build a far greater and more lasting one. His greatest case had not been a prosecution, but a love story. "Shall we go home, my queen?" he asked. "Yes, my king," she replied, her smile radiant. "Let's go home." They walked back to their brownstone, two legends in their own time, their love story woven into the very fabric of the neighborhood they had championed. They had faced down gangsters, police, and a prejudiced world, and had won not with violence or anger, but with intelligence, partnership, and a love that had transformed them both. The prosecutor and the gangster were gone. In their place stood a king and a queen, their reign a testament to the enduring power of a love that chose to build rather than destroy. True justice is not always about enforcing the law, but about creating a world where the law is fair for everyone. The greatest power is not the power to control, but the power to empower others. Do not be afraid to challenge your own convictions, for it is in questioning what we believe that we find what is truly right. And the most profound love stories are not about two people finding each other, but about two people finding a shared purpose that is greater than themselves.